pingao zombie, my way pingao zombie, my way pingao zombie. Hiki oh, hiki oh, hiki oh, hiki oh. Que se baila en Haití, y ese cha-cha-cha que se baila en Haití. Ya empezó el bamboleo, arrímate, morenito lindo. Y empezó el bamboleo, ya empezó el vacilón. Y empezó el bamboleo, ya empezó el vacilón. Y empezó el bamboleo, ya empezó el vacilón. Y empezó el bamboleo, ven para acá mismo. El bamboleo ya empezó el vacilón. Ay, ama y bule, le, 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 le. Ay, ama y bule.
On va interpréter pour Dr. William.
Ay, ama y
J'aime ça prendre la parole. On va interpréter
ay,
James.
ama y bule. Pupile pie, walimpadum, salacre pumwe. Pupile pie, walimpadum, salacre pumwe. I am a good sometimes the evil, I am evil, I am a good sometimes the evil, I am a evil, I am a good sometimes the evil, I am a evil, le 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 le, I am a evil, le le, I am a evil, le 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 le. Pupile pie, walimpadum, salacre pumwe. Pupile pie, walimpadum, salacre pumwe. I am Ansa, Ibo, I am a comsam the Ibo, I am Ansa, Ibo, I am a comsam the Ibo, I am Ansa, Ibo, I am a comsam the Ibo, I am Ansa, Ibo, I am Ansa, I am a comsam the Ibo, I am Ansa, I am a comsam the Ibo, I am Ansa, I am a comsam the Ibo, I am Ansa, I am Ansa, I am Ansa.
Esse, c'est 11 mois, c'est bien, 6 ans, ma femme. C'est pas tout dit, ça, des mecs différemment. Si vous voulez, dans musique, nous, et tous les jours. Allez, gardez en fond de la campagne, ni en le monde qui connaît ça, ouais. Mandez tout ça qui était là. Et tenez Mona, tenez Polo et puis Mario. Tenez tout ça qui ça, bâti sans nous, t'es ça. Les frontières blessées, y'ont été là pour consoler aux man. Man les savent qui raison pour oublier. Pays il a pourra compter comment ouiller. Même si vous partir à l'école, l'idée pour que tout fait son plus belle, ouais. Moi qui raconte tout ça. Polo et puis maillot. Jenny tout ça qui ça, pas qui sont nous des armes. Les frontières blessées, y'ont été là pour consoler aux femmes. Mais les savent pour qui raison pour oublier. comprends-moi, je ne pourrai vraiment. Oh, Becky, bom, servez-moi l'histoire. Comprends-moi, je ne pourrai vraiment. Antoine, je ne sais moins dire. Becky, bon.
Ça qui pas connaît, t'y fait, jeune Jean Baudet, le rivet, non, rue Baudet, t'y mesdames, yo, les pantalons, fait flop, t'y chemise, li encore cliquant, t'y chapeau, l'empoint d'épine, ça va yo, folie d'amour. La table, il passe à manger, dans l'église, il passe à prier, dans le coucher, il passe à dormir. C'est Marianne la fait songer. Dans la table, il passe à manger, dans l'église, il passe à prier, dans le coucher, il passe à dormir. C'est Marianne la fait songer.
Moun Martinique yo, moun la Guadeloupe yo, moun nan Saint-Lucie yo, an celebre jounen Kreyòl, an celebre jounen Kreyòl la. Moun la Guyane yo, moun la Dominique yo, moun zile Seychelles yo, moun di Canada yo. An celebre. Jounen Kreyòl la, an celebre jounen Kreyòl la. Moun an Haïti yo, moun Martinique yo.
Mesdames, Messieurs, bonsoir. Moi, c'est Fred Williams, Comité pour avancement langue créole, a souhaité nous toutes bienvenue dans la 3e soirée Selebrasyon Jounen International langue créole. Jeudi, on a invité nous faire un petit voyage avec nous dans divers territoires côté langue créole la présent, côté langue créole la vivant et bien chita. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Fred Williams. And on behalf of Comité pour Avancement Langue Créole, the Committee for the Advancement of the Creole Language and Montgomery College, I'm pleased to welcome you to our 3rd evening of celebration of the International Creole Day. I am inviting you to join us through our journey in many parts of the world where the Creole language is spoken. Serge, bonsoir. Comment nous y? M'boko dans le Serge. Est-ce qu'on a même? Oui. Ouais. Serge. OK. Bon, alors, avant que nous joignions Serge, moi, je voulais dire que nous sommes extrêmement contents 2 jours passés, 2 jours de célébration nous fait déjà. Et comment tout le monde réagit et puis comment tout est Internet et yo content, activité. Et déjà, il y a des gens qui disent qu'ils ont senti un gens triste que l'activité a fini. Même dire non, il n'est pas fini. Et ça veut dire que nous pas chaque jour on rencontre comme ça. Mais ça veut dire que nous sommes toujours en contact, par exemple, à travers réservoir outils créoles, nous avons des informations sur qui l'heure que peut-être nous avons rencontre comme ça, sous Zoom. Donc, encourager tout le monde à et suivre avec nous. Et donc, j'aimerais que technique mène à retourner à Serge dans quelques instants. Et pendant ce temps, quelques informations sur qui genre activité au dérouler à Soya. Nous avons gagné un petit moment d'affichage côté nous pral comment pour nous opérer parce que à Soya, programme a déroulé surtout en anglais, nous avons une traduction en créole, une interprétation en créole. Pour qui ça? C'est parce que à Soya, c'est Montgomery College qui a patronné le programme, non? À l'occasion activité que vous gagnez qui concernait pour étudiants qui concernait humanité classique. Donc à Soya, on a fait visite ça dans différents pays qui parlent créole et non m'a retourné pour me dire dans quelle zone nous aller. I will come back to let you know. In the meantime, let's see what information you can have to follow the program.
So one reason why you might be having difficulty hearing, we have language interpretation. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you may see a picture of a world, and underneath that it says interpretation. If you click on that, you'll see off English and Haitian Creole. Make sure you're on the English channel if you want to listen in English. So this is what the image is showing right now. So at the bottom of your screen, you have this globe, a globe that says interpretation. To listen in English, please click on English. And then if you wish to listen in Haitian Creole, if you click on the Haitian Creole channel, we'll have some interpreting for you there in that language. So Elise, one of my students, Elise said she couldn't hear. Elise, are you able to hear me now? All of my students who have come, are you able to hear me? If you can type in the chat, you're in a webinar, so you won't be able to speak, but if you have difficulty hearing me, if you can type a message into the chat and let me know. Oh, great, you can hear Abdullah, thank you. Thank you, Maribel.
So we welcome all the students of Professor Murray and all the students of Montgomery College. Tonight is Humanities Day, so you are welcome. Nous disons bienvenue. Nous pral tande parler créole. Donc, bon, m'a bon idée. Tout à l'heure, m'te dit qui pays, m'te dit nous pral visiter plusieurs pays et côté parler créole. Donc, un thème bon nous pays ça yo. Nous pral font ti passer d'abord dans le pays d'Haïti. We will go first in Haiti. And in Haiti, you will have a presentation about the Creole language, the history of the Creole language and the evolution of the Creole. You will have also some important information about the interpretation in Creole on legal issue with Mrs. Régine Duros-Camuré. And we will visit Sainte Lucie. On va visiter Sainte Lucie. We will visit Trinidad. On a visité Trinidad et pendant la petite visite Trinidad, là, on a touché qu'a fait sous pays Venezuela à côté, semble qu'il y a un petit créole tout parler. Et puis, on a tombé dans le pays Cuba. So, we will go to Trinidad and after that to Cuba. So now, I would like to turn it to Professor James Murray, who will welcome you on behalf of Montgomery College. Professor Murray.
Okay, so can everybody hear me? If you can just type yes into the chat really quickly.
Okay, so two
Yes,
participants. Two participants raised their hands and we would like to know if they can. Yes, someone said yes. Steven said yes. Elise, yes.
Great.
Geisha, yes. Leslie, yes.
Okay, wonderful.
Civic Media, Eric, Abdullah. Okay, so
they can
far.
all hear. Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so as Dr. Williams said, my name is James Murray, and I'm a professor of academic English for non-native speakers at Montgomery College.
Dr. Williams
On behalf of Montgomery College's Africa and Diaspora Heritage Committee, I'd like to thank the Committee for the Promotion of Creole Language, COMELAC, and the Haitian Creole Academy for again making their presentation available to the Montgomery College community. Thanks to their generosity, this will be the fourth year of our collaboration. I'd also like to offer a special thanks to Eniola Oluwafoyeku, the Program Operations Coordinator at the International and Multicultural Center and International Student Specialist. Last summer, in the summer of 2019, actually, she founded the college's new Africa and Diaspora Heritage Committee to provide a regular sponsoring organization for events such as this one.
Tant kou, par exemple,
Is Aniola
Komite
here? If she
Héritage
can, yeah,
Africain ak
Aniola, so I'd like to
Diaspora.
thank you for making this
Donc, mwen
possible
di,
at the
on est la
college,
merci en
Aniola.
pile du fait que li
Thank you,
rende sa
James.
pou.
I just want to take the time to bring greetings on behalf of Montgomery College and the International Multicultural Student Center and tell you that we're very proud to co-host tonight's International Creole Day event. And we thank you all for attending this event. And I thank my colleagues, James Murray, Lori Williams, and Komalak for putting this event on. We hope you enjoy it and come back for the rest of the events tomorrow, as well as a Sierra Leonean Creole event on the 30th of October, which James, I believe, has put a link in the chat to register for that one. James?
Thank you. Yes, and I'd just like to reiterate, on Friday at 7 o'clock, we have an incredible presentation on Sierra Leone Creole as well. So yeah, please go to the link and try to attend that. So while this event focuses on Caribbean Creoles, its themes find correspondences in other sociolinguistic environments where a native language struggles to gain official recognition and use in the face of a colonial language. As such, this presentation supports Montgomery College's mission of the radical inclusion of students from all backgrounds. I'd like to return it to Dr. Williams in a minute, and he's going to give us a presentation on the history of Haitian Creole. But I'd just like to say a little bit about Dr. Williams because he really founded the Creole Day in this area and the organization Comilac. Dr. Williams is a scholar of Haitian Creole and French. He received his doctoral degree in French and education from the University of Montreal. And after teaching in Canada for many years, he moved to the United States and undertook a 21-year career as a Haitian Creole content broadcaster for Voice of America. In 2008, he joined Howard University as a professor of Haitian Creole and French and instituted the university's Haitian Creole program. Recently retired, Dr. Williams remains active, traveling internationally to give presentations on topics related to Haiti, Haitian Creole, and Francophone literature in the Caribbean. Locally, he's a director of Comilac, the Committee for the Promotion of Creole Language, and the founder of this annual Creole Day celebration. Dr. Williams?
Thank you, Professor Murray, and we will have the pleasure to welcome to begin. We will have this pleasure to be with many scholars that will talk to us about different Creole language. Donc, nous avons avec nous des experts en langue, des experts en questions linguistiques, des écrivains qui pourront parler nous de différents créoles. Donc, dans quelques instants, c'est moi-même qui ai commencé et première présentation. Bonsoir tout le monde, moi c'est Fred Williams, Histoire langue créole haïtien. C'est sujet ça, moi pour le développer pour nous en 3 points. Naissance créole haïtien, comment société haïtienne évolution langue créole haïtienne. Good evening everyone, I'm Fred Williams. The history of the Haitian Creole language. This is the subject of my presentation in 3 steps. The origin of the Haitian Creole, how the Haitian society perceived this language, and the evolution of the Haitian Creole. Throughout the world, from Africa to the Caribbean, we will find different types of Creole. Whether the Creole language be based on French vocabulary, English vocabulary, or any other vocabulary, the common trait of all Creole is the historical cause of the emergence, which is this need for the slaves coming from different tribes or ethnic groups in Africa to communicate with each other And this common language facilitated also their communication with their master on the plantation. As for the Haitian Creole, which will be at the center of our presentation this evening, it is a language spoken in Haiti by about 12 million speakers, including 2 to 3 million Haitians living abroad, mainly here in the United States, in Canada, in France, in the Dominican Republic, in the Bahamas, in Cuba, and many other islands in the Caribbean region. It's the big exodus, an important outflow of people due mainly to political and economical reasons. But in spite of being away of the country, Haitians stay well connected to their land, their traditions, and their native tongue. The Haitian Creole is one of the Haiti's two official languages together with French. The Creole language of Haiti is based mainly on 18th to 21st century French, with the addition of some African influences, Arawak, and words from Arabic, Spanish, Arawak, Taino, and English. For some scholars, the Creole language came to life from a pidgin language, which is a grammatically simplified means of communication between two or more groups that do not speak the same language. Other experts in language think that the Creole language is a product of the maritime trade dialect and that it arrived in the colony as a full-fledged language. According to Jules Verne, a well-known Haitian philologist and lexicographer, the Haitian Creole originated from the dialect of the Normandy region in France. For Verne, the Norman dialect is the father of the Haitian Creole. But following the work of Haitian linguist Suzanne Comer-Sylvain, published in 1936, about the origin of Haitian Creole, more and more researchers and experts on language have turned their attention on a series of facts pertaining to ethnicity, religious practices, gastronomy, to conclude that the Haitian Creole is strongly connected to the colonial history of the country. A language born, as I mentioned before, in the contact of a variety of different dialects during the colonial era. We are talking about more than 3 centuries of colonization, 1492 to 1803. Based on those facts, poet, author, and politician from Martinique, Aimé Césaire, one of the founders of the Negritude movement, expressed by these words the relationship between Creole and the African languages. He said, Creole is a language whose body is French, but whose soul is African. As for Haitian scholar and writer Pradel Pompilus, he said the Haitian Creole is the result of the meeting of different African ethnic groups with different dialects and their French masters. How the Haitian perceive the use of the Creole language? Was it always well accepted? For a long period of time, linguists avoided to consider the study of the Creole language in general. For most of those experts, Creole was not a true language. They saw Creole as an hybrid language with corrupted forms of the original language from which they came. The general opinion at this particular period was that the Creole languages were only spoken by people who had no education and culture. Unfortunately, in spite of the work of many linguists and researchers to prove that Haitian Creole is a full language in its own right, there is still some resistance toward the use of this language in education or any formal duty. The pervasive view of some resistant to the use of Creole even among some people who cannot speak anything else, is that in order to succeed in life, to advance on the social ladder, to find a good job, you must speak French. This attitude is due to a deep-seated disdain towards Creole at all times in the history of Haiti. However, more and more, thanks to the latest works of language experts, we can see some notable change in attitude, more acceptance of the Creole language in school and in public administration. There is nowadays some important improvement in the past complex relationship between French and Creole in Haiti. In school, students were punished for the use of Creole in class or even during the recess. There is this anecdote about well-renowned Haitian linguist Michel Degraff from the MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. When the linguist was in elementary school in Haiti, he brought home a notice from school about rules and regulation at the institution. One of the important rules was no Creole. This language was considered as defective or as a rudimentary dialect. So the teachers were always very prompt to react against any violator of the rule no Creole by saying to the student, exprimez-vous, meaning speak correctly. In other words, speak French. But in spite of the disdain that for a long period had affected or even violated the usage of the Creole language in Haiti, if we go back in history, we will note that from the year 1792, all the different decrees and proclamations of the French abolitionist Léger Félicité Sontonax about the liberation of the slaves were written in French and also in Creole. We will not forget the position of the Emperor Jean-Jacques Dessalines on the usage of the Creole language, a former slave and the first president of the new independent nation of Haiti. Dessalines was fervently devoted to establish certain egalitarian principles among Haitians. In that respect, he favored land redistribution to former slaves. For Dessalines, all Haitians are black, no matter their complexion. He favored the use of Creole in business and administration. And let's remember that last October 17 marked 214 years of his assassination. Another devoted advocate for the official use of the Creole language when Haiti became independent in 1804 was Étienne Élie Gérin, a well-educated Haitian military and politician who was a general of the Armée Indigène, the indigenous army. He fought with conviction and determination for Creole to become the official language of the new Republic of Haiti. Gérin even wrote a Creole grammar in 1816. It's important to consider that those efforts to give to the Creole language its proper place in the Haitian society were not in vain, because thanks to the advocacy of author, poet, and dramaturgist Félix Morisseau-Leroy, Creole will be recognized as an official language in 1961, and Morisseau-Leroy fought also for the use of the Creole language in schools and in creative arts. But we will have to wait till the year 1982 to see a beginning in the application of the proposed plan of Maurice Leroy with a major overhaul in the educational system known as la Réforme Bernard, the Bernard Reform, based on the recommendation of Haitian educator Joseph Bernard, who advocated the introduction of Haitian Creole as a language of instruction and some change are taking place slowly as officially Creole is used now in school teaching. As an example, in this effort, the MIT Haiti initiative under the direction of Haitian-born linguist Professor Michel Degraff, using Haitian Creole to make learning to be truly constructive and effective, considering the limitation generated by the traditional educational system in Haiti. The graph declared, "We have lost, we have wasted so many Einstein, so many intelligent boys and girls because of language barrier." And appreciating the changes occurring in the Haitian educational system, Haitian educator Yolette Williams declared, "Teaching students to read in a language which has been the primary vehicle for all their social and cultural expression will bring great fruit and truly empower the new literate Haitian." With Creole-based tools and methods, MIT Haiti initiative is helping various institutions in Haiti to assist Haitian faculty consolidate their expertise in the use of a variety of digital resources for the teaching of biology, math, and physics. The Haitian Creole is alive and strong in many academic institutions in Europe and North America. As a matter of fact, several linguists or several linguistic departments of the most important European and North American colleges and universities have Creole study sections, and Haitian Creole is one of the Atlantic Creoles the most studied. We could mention the Creole Institute at Indiana University, recognized as a major center in the United States for research study on the Haitian Creole and also for the teaching of this language. We could mention also the Creole program at Duke University, where we can find the first undergraduate thesis written in Creole by American student Lydia Bradford. And at Howard University, I had the privilege to introduce the Haitian Creole in the language department curriculum in 2010. In Germany, at the University of Heidelberg, Haitian professor Nathalie Castrahan teaches Haitian Creole. So Haitian Creole is also very strong and present in the literature. The presence of the Haitian Creole in literature dated back to the 18th century with the poem Lisette quittait la plaine, a love story from a white colonist named Duvivier de la Marotière. Very early, Creole was perceived as an artistic language. Let's just mention the important contribution of Haitian playwright Juste Chanlat, Massillon Kouakou, and Vadnais Ducasse as pioneers in the Haitian theatrical tradition in Creole. The poem Choukoun, written in 1883 by Oswald Durand, turned into a song by Molière Monton, a famous musician of the period. This song has become a classic in Haitian popular culture. Cric Crac from Haitian diplomat and writer Georges Sylvain in 1901. Sylvain's appreciation of the Creole proverb, its form as much as its content, enabled him successfully to transmute the well-worn tales of Jean de La Fontaine in the landmark work Cric Crac. In 1952, the Haitian playwright Félix Morisseau Leroy translated the Creole play Antigone into Creole. In 1975, well-known author, playwright, and painter Franck Etienne published Des Affis, Dreaded Challenges, the first full novel written in Creole. And in the late 1970s, Frank Etienne created another landmark with his 1978 translation adaptation of Polish playwright Sławomir Mosek, The Immigrant, into Haitian Creole as Palentet, Mind's Game. And Georges Castrat, another Haitian poet, playwright, and essayist, also produced a huge volume of work in Creole. Saint Arnaud Numa, Nono Numa, stands out with his translation of Le Cid of French author Corneille as Général Rodrigue, and more recently, young Haitian playwright Guy Junior Régiste translated L'Étranger from well-known French author Albert Camus in Creole. Writer Gary Victor translated Le Petit Prince from Saint-Exupéry in Creole. And closer to us, well-known broadcaster of the Creole service of the Voice of America, Lionel Desmarat, translated Tartuffe, an international classic of French author Molière in Creole. Desmarat is the author of many other books in Creole, such as Robinson Crusoe as Robin Lacroix in Creole. Creole is also strong and present in the media. The Creole language is presently strong and in full progress in the media in Haiti and in different Haitian communities abroad. And for the past 37 years, on the international airwaves of the Voice of America in Washington, D.C., where I work as a journalist and broadcaster for 21 years. Creole is still strong and present. At the time, Radio France, Radio Moscow used to broadcast in Haitian Creole. The BBC in London broadcasted some special programs in Haitian Creole after the earthquake, which struck Haiti in January 2010. And for a long time, Radio Havana in Cuba have been offering programming in Haitian Creole with Haitian Creolist Hilario Batista Felix as host and director of the Creole service. So, from rejection, disdain, and misery, and thanks to the resilience, the courage, and determination of the African slave on the colonial plantation, a new language, the Creole language, came to life. As for the Haitian Creole, this language is well recognized in numerous academic institutions, present on the literary scene, and in the media. The actual Haitian Creole Academy, with the contribution of linguists and experts on social affairs, have now the responsibility to dispel all the myths around the Creole language, to reinforce the idea that Creole languages are valid languages in their own right. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Our major question and answer period will be at the end of this program, but perhaps if someone has a question for Dr. Williams now, while it's fresh in your mind, you can ask a question in the chat or in the question and answer forum. Okay, if you have a question, if you can type it in the chat or the Q&A forum, we can save those and we'll collect them and answer them at the end. Okay, we do have one question. As of today, how many people speak Haitian Creole?
For now, we have about 12 millions for Haiti. It's about that number. And we can count also all the people out of Haiti, about 3 millions, that are in different parts of the world, France, Canada, the US. So that's about 12 million people from Haiti.
Thank you. So about 12 million people in Haiti, about 3 million in the diaspora, so about 15 million altogether. Thanks for that question, Abdullah. Okay, next we have a present. Okay. Bill Gardby, we can't. Mr. Belgard, are you on the English channel? Now we can. Yes. Okay, so next, our next presentation will focus on what you can do as a profession if you speak 2 languages fluently in this country. So next we'll hear from Regine DeRosca-Murray on the use of Haitian Creole in legal contexts in the United States, but specifically in the Maryland court system. Mrs. DeRosca-Murray is a court-certified legal interpreter working in Haitian Creole and French. She has interpreted in local, state, and federal courts and at congressional hearings. She also partnered with the late Dr. Marie Racine to teach Haitian Creole at the Haitian Embassy in Washington, D.C. She has a master's degree in interpreting from the University of Maryland and has been working in this field for the past 15 years. Mr. Rosca, Murray, you're on mute. Regine, no one can hear you. I'm sorry.
Really?
What channel are you on?
My God. Well, this interpreter dropped the ball. Apparently I am. My apologies. Sorry about that. I need to remove myself from the English channel. I mean, from the...
Yes, Regine was also doing interpreting duties. So while we were presenting in English, she was interpreting in Haitian Creole. And to make that work, she has to be on a different channel. So now she's returning to the English channel where we all are.
Thank you very much. Our host will have to transfer me because I cannot find myself here. So if Miss Loa.
You should be good now.
Good to go? Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. So as I was saying, Okay. Hello, everyone. So this is Zoom era for you, and we apologize for the technical glitch on my part, of course. Thank you, James, for the introduction. My name is Regine Jules Camary, and I am a court-certified interpreter and a translator based here in Maryland. So if you can see my screen, I will jump right ahead and talk to you about what this subject is tonight, which is the use of Haitian Creole in the U.S. justice system. So how did it start? We have to tell you how, because there's something about Haitian Creole specifically in courts that some people are trying to understand. Is it really important for them to use it in court? Should they use French? But no, you can, and you can use Haitian Creole in the courts, and I'm going to tell you why. On October 28, 1978, Congress passed the Court Interpreters Act, and the statute went into effect on January 26, 1979. The goal of the statute is to give non-English speaking and hearing speech impaired defendants and witnesses access to justice and equal chance to understand and fully participate in criminals and civil trials in federal and state courts. The U.S. welcomes more immigrants each year. Therefore, the need for interpreters have increased. And for us to do this job, we have to go to a series of different steps by taking exams and become certified so that we can work in court. So there are 3 types: certified interpreters, professionally qualified interpreters, and language skilled interpreters. Here in Maryland, the certification exam is given into 14 languages, and Haitian Creole is one of them. And what do we do to keep current? We have to abide by, now effective January 1st, 2016, Maryland has a rule where if you are an interpreter, you must meet continuing education requirements in order for you to keep working as an interpreter. And in federal court, it's the same thing too. And as far as certified interpreters in federal court that are federally certified, there are only 8 Haitian interpreters. Maryland has 12,148 Haitians living here, but there is a huge concentration of Haitians in Wimico County, for instance. There's also a lot in Montgomery County, but if you look at the tables rather on the screen, you will see for fiscal year 2019, for both circuit and district court, the percent of expenditures was 20% for 2019 and 25% in 2019. So it goes to show there is an increase. So therefore, the use of the language is widely recognized and people are requesting interpreters. And you can also look at this chart here. You will see, for instance, at the circuit court, there were only, you might think, okay, it's only 2%, but it's a lot compared to other languages, such as, for instance, Iwi, Otwi, and other languages like that. For telephonic interpreting, you will see it's only 1%. But not a lot of people are requesting interpreters, and we are here to encourage you to do so because it's in your best interest. The reason why your need will be better served if you use your native language, which is Haitian Creole, and it does not cost you anything. Now, we talked about interpreters who are qualified and certified. So as you can see on the screen, there are 59% interpreters in the state of Maryland that are certified. And as far as those who are qualified, who have taken the test in the languages, the 14 languages that are available, it's 20%. But there are other interpreters who are qualified, but the exam is not available on their language. They are 12%, and you have other languages that are at 9%. In terms of federal court, so here are the statistics. If you go further down, you will see that in 2017, fiscal year 2017, Haitian Creole was used 269 times, 2018, 266 times, and 2019, 348 times. So we use the language on a daily basis. We interpret for people on a daily basis, be it in person or over the phone. Now, I will take you to some of the complex legal terms that interpreters encounter, and they must do whatever they can in order for them to interpret these terms so that the person for which, or for whom rather, they are interpreting can understand them, because it's possible that this person is not familiar with the term. So if you interpreting for this person, you yourself has to understand it and then put it into context for him, or interpret it the way it's supposed to be. Because remember, as interpreters, we do not explain, we interpret. So we leave the explaining to the lawyers. So you will look here, you will see, for instance, I'll take just one example, clear and convincing evidence. And in Haitian Creole, it's a bon genre preuve, preuve qui solide, preuve qui chita son bagay, et puis, and en français, élément de preuve suffisant. Donc, so when you are interpreting, you really have to have a clear understanding of what is it that you are telling the person, because you cannot say, for instance, clear and convincing evidence, évidence qui clair. Okay, the person will understand that, but you have to use the vernacular that this person is familiar with for him to completely comprehend what's happening. We don't have much time, so we will have to jump ahead. For instance, those are other legal terms, but I am going to take you to something that's really difficult that we encounter when we interpret in court. And these are the leading questions that attorneys ask and the loaded questions. So take, for instance, this question, the first one. Isn't it true that you saw him with the yellow envelope, or you knew all along where he was hiding it, didn't you? Now, if you interpret this sentence as an interpreter, if you say, est-ce que c'est pas vrai ou te wel pran enveloppe jaune nan, ou bien ou te konnen tout au long ki kote l tap kache l? So this interpreting is not quite correct, because it's ambiguous and this person won't know how to answer it. But if you go with ou te wel ak enveloppe jaune nan, pa vre? Ou bien ou te kon fe bien ki kote l te seril, pa vre? So this interpreting is much clearer, and this person will be able to answer either yes or no. And so if we take another example, which is a neutral question, which is easier for someone to answer. For instance, were you in Virginia? This is a neutral question. Est-ce que t'es en Virginie? So you can answer either yes or no. And these are other types of leading questions that attorneys ask. And I must tell you, the attorneys who ask those leading questions are always opposing counsel. So your lawyer will never ask you these questions, because it does not want you to be trapped and for you to be discredited. And before you know it, the trial is over, or there's a mistrial, or you lose, or something like that. So we need to, not need, rather, we encourage lawyers who do not speak English to hire the service of a Haitian Creole interpreter to help them prepare their clients, and for them to explain to their clients the legal system here so that they can be better prepared and be comfortable to speak their language, which is Haitian Creole. I'm going to use another example here for you of a sentence that has both a loaded and leading question. For instance, you still stalk Françoise, don't you? You still loaded. And then the leading part of it is don't you? Now, if you answer yes, it means you used to do it. Oh, no, if you answer no, it means you used to do it, you don't do it anymore. So this is how complicated this can be. Now it's up to you to figure out how you're going to answer this question as a defendant or as a plaintiff, or you can answer, I have never stalked Françoise. M'pa jam te kon ap rapousi Françoise. Donc, c'est kon sa réponse ou an ta supposé. Another question, and this is in the case of a complaint where someone leaves an apartment and her or his neighbor is playing his music loud at night and then took this person to court. Question, do you still play your music late at night? This is a loaded question, because if you don't know, say for instance, you don't play it anymore, or you're still playing it and you're not sure how to answer, then it's problematic. But if the question is asked neutrally, do you play your music at night, then you will know how to answer. And not all questions that imply some facts are loaded. And what do we mean by that? For instance, take this example. Do you still volunteer to teach Haitian Creole on Saturday mornings? Simple answer, yes or no. And finally, we have a way as interpreters to overcome this nightmare in court. If, as an interpreter, the question is not clear to you, do not interpret it. Simply ask counsel. Of course, you will say court indulgence. The interpreter would like for the question to be rephrased. And I promise you, at this time, even the lawyer will notice that, okay, that was not the right question to ask, or the question was too convoluted. And judges sometimes too will say, counsel, rephrase your question because even I did not understand it. And we said all this to say, as a Haitian speaker, we know both Haitian Creole and French are the two official languages of the country, no doubt. But if Haitian Creole is what you speak at home, that's what you speak in school, that's what you speak in the market, that's what you speak everywhere, it is in your best interest to request an Haitian Creole interpreter instead of a French interpreter, because we've seen it played in court where the person requested a French interpreter and then a French interpreter comes in and start interpreting and they cannot fully comprehend what's happening and they cannot follow. It's your right. You have to have someone who can speak your language and interpret for you. And like I just said, Congress gave you this right. So use it and use it wisely. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Regine, for the presentation on language access for Haitian Creole speakers. We have time maybe for a question or two. Does anyone have a question about court interpreting, either becoming one or the procedure for court interpreting? If not, when you think of your questions, if you type them in the chat, we'll collect them, and at the end, we'll answer as many as possible.
Donc, on peut inviter tout le monde, si il y a une question, si il y a plus de questions, et comme professeur Muré-Fink dit nous, donc, inscrire dans le chat là, et puis on est capable de parler, même à la fin du programme, on a vu un petit temps pour ça.
Someone has a question, and it's Yannick. Yannick asked, what is the career pathway to become a Haitian Creole court interpreter? Well, Yannick, if that is what you want to do as a career, and if you live in Maryland, I will use Maryland as an example because this is where I live. What you will need to do, you will need to apply with the administrative office of the court. And in your application, you will need to explain how you came into contact with the language, how you use the language, if you've interpreted before, and everything you've done in terms of education, etc. And then after that, you will be invited, if they accept your application, you'll be invited to participate in a workshop. And after the workshop, you will then get ready to take the written exam. The written exam is general. You don't need to be an interpreter because it's in writing, but they will give you a folder which will help you prepare for this exam. If you pass it, the next phase will be to take an over-the-phone exam, which is the oral proficiency interview, because a lot of people can write a language or can read a language, but they cannot really speak it fluently. Therefore, when you go for that interview, the person on the phone will assess your ability to speak the language in any subject matter. It could be, in my case, it was cinema, it could be politics, it could be anything. I mean, day-to-day conversations. So it can be anything. And then once you pass this exam, you will be a qualified interpreter in the state of Maryland. Your name will be on the registry and you will take on assignments. Of course, when you receive your first assignment, say if it's a trial, I would suggest that you don't take it, but go to court, sit down and shadow someone. And then once you are ready, you will be then ready to take the certification exam. So basically, this is it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so someone said, based on this Creole interpreter for me, I got a few important cues from you.
So, Dr.
Regine.
Williams,
Thanks.
I think next we had some video greetings from Dr. Zamar and perhaps Edward Dantika.
There's another question regarding interpreting. Before we do that, can we? Okay. So Laurie is asking another question. How do you find the service and where? Well, if it's court services, you will go to the clerk's office of your district or circuit court and then request the interpreter. That is if you are not represented by a lawyer. But if you are represented by a lawyer, your lawyer will do that for you.
Okay, and if I'm reading the program correctly, next we had greetings from Dr. Zamar and Edward Dantika.
Maxime yo nan Komalak. M salue nou et puis m souhaite que n'a passé un très bon moment ensemble dans conférence ça. M souhaite que nous gagnons pile brasser l'idée, en pile réflexion avec en pile passion sous langue ça, belle langue nous créole. Donc honneur, respect pour nous toutes et puis chapeau bas.
Bonjour tout le monde, moi c'est Hélène Zamor, moi c'est Jean Martinique. Moi j'ai enseigné français à l'université de West Indies Keville Campus. Mais moi là aussi pour dire que créole c'est une langue qui est importante, qui fait partie de l'histoire nous, qui fait partie du patrimoine nous, donc nous pas pour honte parler créole. Et à sous ça, moi j'ai dit un bon journée créole et vive le créole.
Okay, should we go straight to the presentation on Guadeloupe, or do we have time for a little musical interlude? Maybe we should push through them. Okay. Okay. Oh,
there's another question.
We can, Serge. Okay.
Can we? Okay. Mika is asking, do you also need to be a court-certified interpreter for litigation work? Well, Mika, it all depends. If you are doing this in federal court, you have to be certified, and they are really strict about this rules and regulations about that. So it's up to them. So if they want to work with you, that's fine, but they will give priority to certified interpreters first. I hope that answered your question.
And Regine, I just like to add, so by certified, you mean at the state level, since the test is no longer offered at the federal level?
That is correct, yes, at the state level, in my case, Maryland, but federal courts do come to us too, who are certified in Maryland or in California or in New York, if the federally certified interpreters are not available or whatever.
Okay, so I think we're running a little bit behind, so maybe in the interest of time, should we move on to Guadeloupe then? So our next presentation is by Joel Perot. He's a writer from Guadeloupe. He has pre-recorded his presentation, and during the presentation, Dr. Williams provides an introduction for him. So I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Williams.
Perot is a writer from Guadeloupe. His literacy work has integrated the Creole language as the principal form of expression. His most recent published book is a Savannah Dream for the Sun Crabs, Un rêve savane pour crabe créole, an illustrated fiction story for children taking place in the Caribbean. He previously wrote a short story, L'appli enfant à Manhattan. He wrote poetry, he wrote a fiction novel, Façadage, and his works has been acquired by teachers in schools to increase material literature to support Creole teaching. Joël Perrault has been featured in media outlets in his native Guadeloupe, in France, Canada, and here in the United States. We are very pleased to welcome Joël Perrault, who will take us on a tour of the Creole language in Guadeloupe. Joël Perrault.
Well, for this, I prepared a short presentation for the Creole in Guadeloupe. For the Creole in Guadeloupe, I must say that in the past, in Guadeloupe, Creole was despised and left for illiterates. Even today, although its teaching is in primary school, secondary school, college, and university schools, it is not accepted by the administration in place because you cannot use it in court or in any other institution. The transmission of the Creole as a language is more challenging when you don't have enough support and material to make this happen. Speaking Creole is not enough to keep it alive. Oral transmission is not enough. A language needs to be spoken, needs to be listened to, and needs to be written and seen. We need to do more to educate our youth about our cultures and about the world from our perspective. There isn't any limit to that. What we are going to do about it, I am going to provide you with a short description on how the Creole language evolved in Guadeloupe. To understand how the language came about, Robert Chaudesson in 1992 described the situation in his book, Des îles des hommes, des langues. It seemed that the Creole language was a product of the colonization of the New World, when there were far more African slaves than Europeans on the plantations. The slave language was nothing less than an approximation of what the masters could speak at the time in the colony. The inhabitants have mingled French, a bit of Caribs, and different African slave languages together to create the Guadeloupean language, which is a variant of what we know today as Creole. Please note that for those places colonized by Spain or Portuguese, the French would be replaced by the Spanish or Portuguese influences. We can say that Creole has been considered a learning tool in the academic establishment in Guadeloupe. Unofficially, since 1950, by the teacher Gérard Lauriette, aka Papa Yaya, but the language was not appreciated for its true value by the National Board of Education. That board wanted Creole to stay and remain out of the education system, and in 1957, they fired Gérard Lauriette, but that did not stop Gérard Lauriette to help his people, especially the dropouts of the public school system. He created his own school in 1959 for them and developed several teaching methods, and found that he developed several teaching methods that found great use for other teachers as well. During his era, he laid the path for making Creole an educational instrument for successful careers for many Guadeloupeans. Nowadays, and well-known teachers and authors like Hector Poulet have learned from him, been inspired by him, and continue to promote and build from his approach. We can also say nationalist organizations aim to unite the country from the French colonial state, use the Creole language as a means for resistance and contributed to its promotion. The emergence of the movement started in 1960, 1980. It somehow contributed to serious reflection on the Guadeloupean identity and questioning the Guadeloupean political status quo. Its relationship with France and framing a vision of emancipation referred even today. Our Creole, our tradition, Goka music, our nationalist, and our few radio exclusively broadcasting in Creole, the Guadeloupean trade unions, which elected Creole as the principal choice of communication. All of them were despised and portrayed as entities to stay away from. The political situation was tense at that time, and the independentists, like the Creole, were stigmatized when Guadeloupeans were treated and paid unfairly at work or brutalized when rebelling against it. The French government did not want to see Creole used as a unifying tool for a population, inspiring to more respect, justice, fairness, and emancipation. The movement took a blow after the 1967 massacre perpetrated by the French riot police following a strike and rebellion frustrated by the national movement. A lot of Guadeloupeans, especially teachers like Sonny Whipper, Hector Poulet, Robert Fontes, and many more wrote texts, stories, and poems in Creole. Hector Poulet and Sylviane Telchid, a math teacher and a history teacher after 1976, together truly devoted themselves to later obtain hours to teach Creole classes in their school to students. It can also be noted that Hector Poulet somehow preconceived a dictionary with him because of his collection of Creole words gathered during all the years he had been working in different regions of the country. But it was until 1999 that Hector Poulet, Sylviane Telchid, Ralph Ludwig, and Daniel Montbrand came together and published a successful Creole dictionary embedded with complete detailed structure and functionality of the Guadeloupean grammar. Today, the orthograph of Creole, when we write, is more standard because the spelling is understood by everyone. Thanks to Sonny Whipper, l'ONAC of Haïti, aka Académie Créole Haïtien, and the GIREC, Groupe d'études et de recherche en espace créole, because of the work of all the people and organization, Creole is in every school of Guadeloupe and even in the Academy of Créteil in Paris, where Tony Mango with his peers does the same thing for students who choose Creole for their bachelor degrees. where there is still a lot of debate on the origin of Creole, leaving the population divided. While many linguists believe that Creole was a poor, retarded product derived from the French language, others are promoting its Egyptian and African origin. The latter approach was triggered by the publication of the 500 pages book Roussicam from Jean-Luc Duvial in 2017, before many other authors came with similar theses. Jean-Luc Duvial is an Egyptologist, and in his work, he collected many data and provided several proofs that our syntax, the way the language is constructed, is fundamentally linked with ancient Egypt and other African nations. This confirms other language who made that thesis earlier, like Jean-Claude Mboli from Central Africa. The Creole journey has gone through many life cycles, from denigration to affirmation of identification of cultural identity. Yet, much more needs to be done to enable this beautiful ancestral language to strive. As Nelson Mandela said, I have discovered the secret that after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb. It is up to us to keep this cultural legacy alive despite the many challenges faced. I keep that in mind as work towards contributing to the Creole literature. So this is what I can say about Creole. And
that since the years 40s, 1940s, there was a group of intellectuals in Guadeloupe who put this academy in action called ACRA, Académie Créole des Antilles, to promote the Creole language. What can you tell us about this institution?
Oui. Okay. Yes, this organization was one of the first organizations, which I believe I don't remember all the members in Accra, but I think that there were Sonny Weber and many teachers, other teachers in this association, who start to contribute toward a common goal for the Creole. And later we see more being done regarding the Creole, and also on the campus in the University of Antigua. Guyane, they were doing a lot for the Creole. But what I can say that for those who want more information about this, they can send me an email, and I will be able to provide them and proof of all these organizations and list and more details about them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jounen Kreyòl. You said in your presentation, and I'm quoting, that the Creole had to pass by denigration before affirmation. Much needs to be done for the Creole to be totally accepted, for Creole to have a better status in Guadeloupe. I would like you to elaborate a little more.
All right. Yes, because the Creole before I think it's the same thing will happen also in back in the day in St. Lucia or other countries in the Caribbean, where our parents or teachers were saying, don't speak Creole in my classroom, or don't speak Creole at home, or we were saying that if you speak Creole, you won't learn, you won't be a good student, you won't be able to succeed in school if you speak Creole. There was things like this, and so there was well, I don't know if a social class separation of people speaking Creole and people speaking French and so on, and but after the independentist movement, or during the independentist movement in Guadeloupe, that movement, the nationalists, like Sonny Rupert and so on, they went back they went to the back of the country, went to the people who make Guadeloupe, the agricultures, people doing farming, agriculture, to study these people, because these people who make Guadeloupe, who make Guadeloupe eat and create riches, create product, create things for the Guadeloupe economy and so on. And so they went to those people and studied these people, because these people were, I say, left and denigrated and so on. So, and these people were in majority and need support, all that. So they want to study these people, work with these people, and understand what is required to be done for the country, and these people, their language was Creole. Their language was Creole. So then the nationalists understood that the Creole is the language of Guadeloupe, really, because those people are Guadeloupean, is those people who make the country. So they came with this slogan saying one country and one people, and they didn't say one language, but they mean one language too, one language, and which is not the language of the colonizer.
Nabdi Joël Perrault, merci en pile. We thank you, Joël Perrault, for this presentation on the Creole in Guadeloupe. Et avant nous d'aller dans l'autre présentation, qui c'est Creole, the professor Murray will come back to introduce the Creole in St. Lucia. But before that, we're going to just say hello to a few people that following us on Facebook and other set. We have Ricky from Montreal. We have Gerda Jean-Louis from Massachusetts. We have Margaret Ford from New York. And also we have other people in Miami, Florida. Mr. Budry Daniel and Mrs. Price Daniel, and Pastor Mike Mercurio around here in Maryland. So we say welcome to everybody who is watching us tonight. Tout le monde qui suit nous bien content nous là, et n'a continué à découvrir créole là un peu partout dans Caraïbes là. Donc, before we go to Professor Murray, let's hear some Caribbean music.
Yes, so a question is being asked, how different or similar are Haitian and Guadeloupean Creole? So perhaps one difference to highlight might be the use of the particle op versus ka. In Haitian Creole, for example, and Serge and Dr. Williams and Regine can expand more. In Haitian Creole, the progressive particle, for example, it is raining, would be la pluie ap tombe, perhaps? La pluie ap tombe, rain is falling.
Yes.
Whereas in the lesser, is that right? Or the...
C'est ça. That's exact. Ou correct. Serge a pas prouvé, académicien là.
In the Lesser Antillean Creole, the progressive particle is not ap, but ka. And when in the presentation on Trinidad Creole, Namdi Hodge will be talking about this some more. But one of the defining differences between Haitian Creole and Lesser Antillean Creole, as represented by Creoles from Grenada, Trinidad, Guadeloupe, St. Lucia, is the use of the particle ka, which in Haitian Creole means ability, ka can, versus in Lesser Antillean Creole, ka is just used to indicate the present tense or present habitual. Now, are there other similarities or differences, Mr. Beldard? Yes. We can't, I'm sorry, Serge, are you on the English channel? They can't hear you. Are you on the English? Nicole and Nicole, can you hear him now? Also,
I'm hearing.
Okay. Nicole, are you on the English channel? If you look at the interpretation globe, did you click on English? Okay.
Serge, I think it's sa. I think you meant sa to be able to in the Lesser Antillean. Ni for us is have or has. Right, but in the Lesser Antillean, it's sa.
No, that you mean get.
No, I beg to differ. No, I think it's sa is the part. Sa is to be able to. Ni is to have.
Like
so
gain.
ni corresponds to gain Haitian, but in Lesser Antillean, sa corresponds to ka. If I say moi sa parle Creole, it means I can't speak Creole. No, I'm saying in Lesser Antillean version. So where you say ka in Haitian Creole, to be able to, we say sa. So if you say moi ka parle Creole, we will say in Lesser Antillean, moi sa parle Creole, meaning to be able to. And the ni, right, but if you say you're able to speak, if you can speak it, if you're able to speak it, what do you say? Right, and we would say moi sa parle, yeah. Yeah.
So then how is ka used in Lesser Antillean Creole?
It's for the continuous and the habitual progressive tense marker. So if I say moi ka ale la rivière, it means I'm going to the river, or I go to the river usually. So if I say moi ka ale la rivière tous les samedis, Yes. I said, moi ka ale la rivière.
Okay. Right. Which is the defining difference. Yeah. And pral is a
Yeah, the idea of
op plus ale,
progressive, the
Right.
progressive action happening, something which is happening, the progression, an action in progress. Mhm. So it's interesting, interesting difference between the two, but that they people get used to it. Haitians go to Guadeloupe or whatever, and they get used to it. I remember when I went to St. Lucia, I didn't have any problem conversing with St. Lucian, whose Creole is very much influenced by Martinique, given the geographical.
I'm sorry, if I can stop you for a second.
Yeah,
No one can hear.
No
one can hear. So we have to fix that issue.
Oh boy.
Now. Okay.
I am not sure why.
I can hear you.
You can hear me? No. Can you hear me now?
Jacques says it's okay now. Is it okay for anybody else? Yes, Yannick says now we can. All right, Serge. Serge, can you say something to see if they can hear you?
Yes, yes. Can you hear me now? Yes.
No,
I
can't hear you.
Really?
Serge, if you can click on the English channel, perhaps.
I don't know. I guess the engineer removed it. I do not have it at all. Let's see. How about now? Now I can hear me, right? Okay. All right. That's good.
This is my idea will be to leave some of the question answer for later.
For later, yeah.
Yes.
Before because at the time, yes. And then because let's see, Murray for the next introduction.
All right. So we have 3 more left to do. We're doing St. Lucian Creole, Trinidad Patois or Trinidad French Creole, and then Haitian Creole in Cuba. So I'd like to introduce Serge, actually, a long-time friend of mine.
Yes.
Yes. So
good.
In the 1987 Haitian Constitution, Haitian Creole was added to French as an official language, but the Constitution also mandated that the Haitian Creole Academy be created to serve as the agency for promoting the standardization and full incorporation of Haitian Creole into administrative, legal, educational, and cultural systems of the country. Although this agency was codified in 1987, the Académie Créole Haïtienne, the Haitian Creole Academy, was only officially installed in 2014 after a special recruiting committee composed of linguists, university professors, and Creole activists was formed to invite and induct the world's most prominent Haitian scholars, professionals, and artists working in the Haitian Creole language. One such inductee was Serge Bellegarde, the only Academy member in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. Mr. Bellegarde has had a 40-year career as a French and Haitian Creole translator for the Organization of American States. In the 1980s, he introduced Haitian Creole translation at the OAS and has since supervised translation projects that have made medical and technical information available to millions of monolingual Haitian Creole speakers. Born and raised in Haiti, Mr. Bellegarde left to attend university in the United States. He has a degree in French and linguistics from Georgetown University, and his master's degree is in history from Howard University. And in 2014, he was inducted into the inaugural group of academicians for the Academy. I give this rather detailed introduction to him because although he's not presenting today, he will be serving as a respondent and answering questions at the end of the session, and he has presented on other days in this celebration. And now he will introduce his friend, Dr. Humphrey Regis, who will present on Creole in St. Lucia. Mr. Bellegarde?
Thank you very much, James. The Dr. Humphrey Regis is a scholar from St. Lucia whom I met many years ago. And we used to we used to be on the Haitian radio program on the WPFW in Washington, D.C. And he was a radio announcer, but he has moved on and now he's teaching in Texas. And he is a scholar who has studied the issue of languages, social issues, historical issues in pertaining to St. Lucia and to areas in Africa. And he left the area for quite a few years ago. And I was glad to reconnect with him. And for this program, I thought that he would be ideal to participate in this program. Donc, gen quelques années de ça, l'homme arrivé Saint-Lucie pour première fois, gen peut-être 5-6 ans. De ça, m'était bien saisi, l'homme arrivé Saint-Lucie, malgré que langue officielle là, c'est créole. C'est anglais, pardon. Mais l'homme arrivé, moi, ouais, dans tout coin de la rue, tout le monde, c'est pas en anglais à parler, mais c'est en créole qu'il a parlé. Donc, c'est une belle surprise pour moi. Donc, je communique avec eux sans problème. Donc, sans plus, et m'a introduit chez Dr. Humphrey Regis qui pourra parler d'une série de sujets qui ont pour avec créole là dans Sainte-Lucie.
In the 1987 Haitian Constitution, Haitian Creole was added to French Creole as an official language. The Constitution also mandated that the Haitian Creole Academy be created to serve as the agency for promoting the standardization and full incorporation of Haitian Creole into administrative, legal, educational, and cultural systems of the country. Although codified in 1987, the Académie Créole Haïtienne, the Haitian Creole Academy, was officially installed in December 2014 after a special recruiting committee composed of linguists, university professors, and Creole activists was formed to invite and induct the world's most prominent Haitian scholars, professionals, and artists producing work in the Haitian Creole language. One such inductee was Serge Bellegarde, the only Academy member in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. Mr. Bellegarde has had a 40-year career as a French and Haitian Creole translator for the Organization of American States. In the 1980s, he introduced Haitian Creole translation at the OAS and has since supervised translation projects that have made medical and technical information available to millions of monolingual Haitian Creole speakers. Born and raised in Haiti, Mr. Bellegarde left to attend university in the United States. He has a master's degree in history from Howard University and a degree in linguistics from Georgetown University. In 2014, Mr. Bellegarde was inducted into the inaugural group of academicians of the Académie Créole Haïtienne. I will now turn it over to Mr. Bellegarde, who will introduce this session's expert on St. Lucian Creole, Dr. Humphrey Regis. Mr. Bellegarde will also be a respondent and part of the roundtable at the conclusion of the session. Mr. Bellegarde.
Thank you very much, James. Merci en pile. C'est avec un grand plaisir que nous avons accueilli nous dans la 37e session Selebrasyon Jounen Kreyòl qui a commencé depuis 1983. Donc, en pile activité faite, tout côté qui vient créole, ils ont célébré le mois créole là. Donc, c'est comme ça que dans la zone Washington, Maryland, c'est avec un grand plaisir que nous avons accueilli Dr. Humphrey qui ont parlé créole tout. Professeur, docteur, oui, il a enseigné. Et c'est un monde que je connais longtemps, plus passé 20 ans, nous étions ensemble dans la station radio WTFW, côté que nous a fait jouer musique, discuter, bagaille qui intéressé, bagaille là. Donc, docteur Sedlissi, il était directeur des nouvelles dans la radio. Il était un professeur tout, le lycée, un professeur dans la faculté de communication dans l'université de Texas, dans la ville de Houston. Lycée ancien doyen dans le collège Thomas Freeman dans l'université ça. Docteur juste concevoir et puis préparer un série de projets pour étudier à l'école secondaire avec éducation grand monde sur l'histoire africaine avant de venir dans la Caraïbe là, à l'autre côté dans le continent américain. Docteur juste publié en pile article, il a en pile conférence et il préparé en pile article sur l'étude communautaire africaine dans le monde. Professeur dans Saint-Lucie a demandé d'écrire un livre qui est les Africans Before CARICOM pour être capable de servir avec lui pour enseigner étudiants l'histoire population communauté africaine. Docteur est toujours intéressé dans le développement de la langue créole là dans Saint-Lucie, côté de célébrer Jounen Kreyòl là tout dans fin mois octobre là. Il recevoir dans le gouverneur général Saint-Lucie une médaille l'or qui c'est l'ordre de mérite de Saint-Lucie pour être service du pays. C'est avec un pile plaisir que Comalac, comité pour avancement langue créole là, Académie créole haïtien, avec Montgomery College, a accueilli Dr. Humphrey Régis dans la 37e édition Selebrasyon Jounen Kreyòl ça. Il va faire une présentation sur la situation langue créole là dans le pays et Dr. Régis, et c'est avec un gros plaisir que je passe la parole.
Merci beaucoup, M. Belgade. Merci beaucoup. Messieurs, mesdames, moi c'est Mamaï Saint-Lucie. Moi fait en village en Saint-Lucie, il y a créé Dennery, D-E-N-N-E-R-Y. Les moi 10 ans, moi allé l'école, lycée, à le sud de Saint-Lucie, Vieux-Fort. Bon Vieux-Fort, on y go l'airport en Saint-Lucie. Hiwanora Airport. OK? Après ça, moi allé wete en Castries, capitale Saint-Lucie. Les moi là, moi te by service comme un teacher à l'école catholique en Saint-Lucie, en Castries, St. Aloysius R.C. Boys Secondary School. Après ça, moi arrivé en Amérique, Washington, D.C. Moi allé University of District of Columbia, University of Maryland at College Park, avec Howard University.
Is there a bibliography of their activists and what is the situation of the Creole language in Tunisia presently?
There is a desire on the part of many people to see a reaffirmation of the value and the need, the value of and the need for Creole as a means of our own expression among ourselves, but also as a means of exchange between us and so many other peoples in other parts of the world, whether it be in Haiti or Martinique or Senegal or the Pacific or wherever. So there is that very strong interest in Creole as a reflection of what is inside of us and as a tool or a medium that facilitates exchange with others. There has been some work on the compilation of dictionaries and references like that that can help people understand the language, its structure, clauses, phrases, the rules of new word formation, the rules of relationships between words and ideas, and of course, the legitimacy of borrowing from other languages. Sorry, yes, there have been some works that pertain to that. The works with which I am most familiar basically provide very basic things like a St. Lucian Kreyòl dictionary. Another work I am familiar with was written actually by the wife of the principal at St. Lucia Teachers College quite a few years ago, to help many of the people who may be visiting the island in their attempts to understand the language and to have some facility in it so that they can communicate well with St. Lucians. It is called A Visitor's Guide to St. Lucian Patois. Yes, written by Mary Toynbee. I also know that there is an education officer in the Ministry of Education, Mr. Jones Mondesi, who compiled another work that provides in one place a lot of important information about not just individual words, but the rules and related cultural things. Mr. Jones Mondesi, yes. I also know that the Folk Research Center in St. Lucia is engaged in that, again, resurgence of Kreyòl in St. Lucia. I don't know that I should use the word resurgence, but a consolidation of what has been, and an enrichment of what has been, and a propagation of what has been. I think the Folk Research Center in St. Lucia has that as one of its programs.
Thank you.
What I understand in St. Lucia, at least from personal experience also, is the fact that maybe there isn't enough of a political will on the part of the leaders of St. Lucia to really deal with what is really a bilingual issue, probably because of the same reasons of social prejudices and things like this. I understand, for example, that the Governor Louise, when she was the governor,
yes,
was a teacher and very much interested in Creole, but she didn't have the support, the institutional support in the country to really push the language.
Yes. Please let me say this. Many of us claim we have been independent since the 1960s. A few since the 1970s, at least in the English-speaking islands. Of course, for Haiti, we have to go much further back in time. Here is the curious thing about us, many of us, especially in the Eastern Caribbean, post-independence. There are so many things that we can do by ourselves with no inputs from anybody else, but we don't do. The education of our people in their long history and heritage going thousands of years in the African continent is something our ministries of education can do without help from OAS, from UNESCO, or from the Canadian Development Agency, or from the British Development, or the Japanese or the Chinese Development Agency. It is something we can do. We don't do it. That elevation or affirmation of our Kreyòl, I believe also is something we can do. We have the experts in education, we have the experts in linguistics, we have the education in this and that, and so and so, and such. We don't do it. One of the saddest things about the psychological remnants of colonialism is that the subject in the former colony still has that psychological dependence for an approval from massa, even when the subject in the former colony can do.
My family is from Trinidad. For this summer, I've actually been taking a class in Trinidad French Creole, Trinidad Patois. So in Haiti, most of the population are monolingual Haitian Creole speakers. So the argument for learning Haitian Creole in Haiti is rather strong, and that this is the only language that children know, and so they need to be educated in their first language. My question is, what is the argument for learning a French Creole language in a place like Trinidad or St. Lucia or Grenada, where our ancestors, my mother, my grandfather, still can speak this French Creole, but they're also bilingual in English and can access their history in English. So what is the argument for learning a French Creole in these bilingual Anglophone countries?
Thank you. Please let me argue that we can present the same argument for learning the Creole in Trinidad or in Grenada or in Dominica, as we can present for the understanding of the African heritage going back not just 500 years with West Africa as a source of slaves, but 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, 10,000, whatever years. All human beings need a center, an anchor, a point of reference from which they make sense of the world. That center or point of reference or anchor comes from an understanding of deep history, heritage, culture. We may get that from a understanding of our long-term history, but we also may get that from an understanding of the conveyors of so much that flows from the history, the individual or collective psychology, the individual or collective aspirations, the individual or collective way of looking at things, okay? The individual or collective way of relating to others. So much of that is captured in the language we speak. So for an understanding of our own selves, for the development of our own anchors, which can provide terms, points of reference from which we can spring forward and upward, let us look at the history, as I have tried to indicate in St. Lucia, but also let us understand, use, and appreciate the full significance and meaning of the language. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. For the sake of developing anchors from which we can, that provide points of reference from which we spring forward. The history and the language, yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Whether you are in Haiti or in St. Lucie or in Trinidad.
Absolutely.
Encore l'autre question. Dr. Regis, you said earlier that sometimes the way the Creole language is treated in St. Lucia is a crime, and I'm quoting your own word. Can you elaborate more on that observation and help us understand better?
I see. I think I was referring to an education on one's long millennia-old history, as opposed to the language. I think I was referring to the education on one's long history and heritage and culture. I think so. If we do not provide students or people of a land with terms of reference for themselves that are rooted in their own history and heritage and culture, then they will get these terms of reference from the history and heritage and culture of others. And the most obvious others we have in the Caribbean are the historical, military, and economic, and religious, and educational dominators. If we do not give them their own history and heritage and culture to provide terms of reference, they will get those terms of reference from the history of others, including those who have sought to dominate them. And therefore, that will make them considerably, continually dependent on these sources of terms of reference. Yes. And by doing that, we are perpetuating then the grip that those who dominate them have on them. That is a crime.
This book about Africa.
Africans before CARICOM.
Before CARICOM. Are you going to have it published in Creole also?
I am working with an organization in St. Lucia.
All right.
I hope we will be able to do that, not only for people in St. Lucia, but people up and down the region.
All right.
I made sure I wrote the book at a level that even a 10 or 12-year-old starting secondary school would understand. That is because I wanted to make sure, because many of our people do not have English as a first language, the level in the book is a level that they too can understand, including the parents and grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That's good.
I very much hope we'll be able to widely distribute the work, but it requires the collaboration, the cooperation of some people back home. Right now, it's available on Amazon, but I wish we would be responsible for distributing our own information about ourselves.
On behalf of the Comité pour Avancement en Créole, Dr. Regis, we just want to thank you very much. Also on behalf of Montgomery College, on behalf of the Académie Créole, thank you very much for your presentation.
Well, let me thank you also for giving me this opportunity to speak to my people about things about us, to speak to my people about things about us to which I think we must attach a lot of importance.
Thank you again.
The need for us to understand our own terms of reference, and from that understanding to spring forward.
Oui, Serge.
Ouais.
Donc, nous, vraiment, professeur Régis, bon, nous, en pile, gros précision et bonne précision sur Créole, dans zone Sainte-Lucie.
Oui, c'est un petit pays qui est très intéressant pour visiter. Hein?
Oui, on connaît bien beaucoup passé là.
Ah oui.
Bon, t'es une question sur Créole Guadeloupe, Créole Haïti, qui j'en ont comparé. Rapidement, on a fait ça, nous va miser sur lui. Mais je vais vous donner une petite idée sur Jean ça.
Oui, naturellement, pour les gens qui connaissent créole, et pour moi-même, depuis que on a parlé créole, je connais que le sorti ou bien Guadeloupe ou bien Martinique. Parce que je m'habitue avec un conseil de mots que j'utilise, et naturellement avec particules ça, de K, ni, et ça c'est typiquement de Guadeloupe et Martinique. I'm saying that it's easy for me to distinguish between Haitian Creole and Martinican and Guadeloupe Creole, because these particles that you were mentioning, James, the ka and ni, for example, in Haiti, we'll say, in Guadeloupe, you'll hear la pluie qu'a tombé, it's raining, la pluie qu'a tombé. But in Haiti, we will say la pluie ap tombé. Donc, the minute somebody says that, you know, this is Haitian Creole or Guadeloupean Creole. And what Professor Hodge was saying, Professor Hodge, I think your microphone is, you're on mute.
Yes.
Yes. I think you were saying that you would say sa, I believe.
Yeah, we say sa. Like if I say moi sa parler Creole, it means I can't speak. I can't speak. Moi sa danser bien, I can dance well.
Interesting,
yeah. Okay.
interesting.
Yes.
Another word that you will hear a lot in Guadeloupe, Martinique, which is the equivalent of our Haitian bagay. En Haïti, tout le monde a dit bagay, but in Guadeloupe, Martinique is bitin. Ça son bon bitin. Ça son bon bagay. You hear it all over the place. The same way we use bagay. So there are a number of things like this.
But you know, we can understand each other anyway, you know, even with those variation different.
Absolutely.
Yes, okay. I'm going to turn it over to Professor James Murray.
Okay. All right. All right, we have a real treat now. Next presentation is going to be on Trinidad Patois by Namdi Hodge. And although his presentation is pre-recorded, Mr. Hodge has graciously agreed to attend from Trinidad to answer questions at the end of the session. I met Mr. Hodge for the first time, I think in May, when a class in Trinidad Patois, Trinidad French Creole, was offered through the Society for Caribbean Linguistics. I registered for the class, and the class I've been taking it for the past 5 months. The class is attended by students from throughout the Americas, professors, professionals, graduate students from Canada all the way to Venezuela and points in between, including Grenada and Jamaica. It's a masterpiece of a class. Based in Trinidad and Tobago, Namdi Hodge has degrees in French and Spanish from the University of the West Indies. He teaches French and Spanish at Couve East Secondary School and tutors French at the University of the West Indies. And he teaches Trinidad French patois at the community-based Caribbean Yard campus at Tunapuna and at the Alliance Francaise in the Eastern Caribbean and internationally via his popular Zoom class of which I just spoke. He has also written the first textbook on Trinidad patois, and he has also published the book Vini Chante en Patois, a collection of French Creole songs in Trinidad. His 2 decades of research into Lesser Antillean French Creole in Anglophone and Hispanophone countries has led to an extensive collection of video interviews of the last speakers of this language in Trinidad, Grenada, and Venezuela. He has been featured in newspaper articles in Trinidad and is a frequent contributor to television programs on this topic in Trinidad. And his data is used by university students and scholars working in the field. So I'm going to play his pre-recorded presentation, and he's going to remain at the end to take some questions.
Non mwen se Namdi Hodge, mwen sorti Trinidad. For the last 20 years, I have been documenting, researching, and teaching French Creole from Trinidad, Grenada, and Venezuela. Today, I'm going to speak to you a bit about Trinidad French Creole and touch a bit on Venezuelan French Creole. I hope you enjoy my presentation. I always start every session I do with a proverb. So this Trinidad French Creole proverb says, "Benye ishmoun, me pa lave, deye zowey yo." Benye ishmoun, me pa lave, deye zowey yo. Which means you can bathe people's children, but don't wash behind their ears. It's about respecting boundaries and limits. So we're going to start by looking at the history of French Creole in Trinidad. Most folks are surprised to find out that French Creole is and was spoken in Trinidad because we were never an official French colony. We were never under French political rule. Yet, most of the 19th century, French and French Creole culture were dominant. Our French Creole was imported. It came to Trinidad through immigration, namely from the neighboring French Creole islands. Trinidad started off as a Spanish colony. We were claimed for the King of Spain by Columbus in 1498. The actual name Trinidad was given because Columbus saw we have 3 hills to the south of Trinidad that are referred to as the Trinity Hills, and he named them after the Holy Trinity, so La Trinidad. But under Spanish rule, we were very underpopulated, and there was not enough people in the country to actually have a sufficient labor force and develop the vast amounts of fertile land. As a result, the King of Spain issued a cedula in 1783, the second, which invited people to come and settle in Trinidad in exchange for a lot of good incentives. For example, you would get a certain amount of land and a certain amount of tax exemptions based on the amount of slaves, the number of slaves you were accompanied by. Many planters in the neighboring French colonies took up the offer and came to Trinidad in great numbers with their French Creole-speaking slaves. So from as close as Grenada, which was at the time a French colony, to as far as Haiti, Saint-Domingue. People came from all these French territories with their French Creole-speaking slaves and populated Trinidad. So eventually this French and French Creole-speaking population became the dominant group in Trinidad. They outnumbered the English speakers and the Spanish speakers. So as I mentioned, for most of the 19th century, French and French Creole language and culture were dominant in Trinidad. All of the music we had that was performed in the 19th century in Trinidad was done in French Creole. Our calypso, our ballet, our stick fighting music was all performed in French Creole. We actually had education being conducted for most of the 19th century in French, and the vernacular of Trinidad was French Creole. So we're looking next at the decline of French Creole. So today, French Creole is an endangered language where the speakers are between 60 and 80 years old, and we have about roughly 3,000 or so fluent speakers of the language. Coming from a time when it was our most widely used language, now it's on the decline, and we look at what started its decline. So the English government, faced with this big wall of speakers of French, Creole, and French, embarked upon a policy to impose English language and culture, which was referred to as the Anglicization policy. And this policy is what started the decline of French Creole, the policy by the government to impose and enforce English language and culture. For most of the first half of the 19th century, education was conducted in French. So the English government in about 1850 set up a series of ward schools. At the time, we were divided into wards and made English the only possible language of instruction. So as a result, English became important to improve your socioeconomic situation and get a better life. So parents now saw a link between their children acquiring English and improving their life. So when English came on the scene, French Creole was seen as being a language of the old world, of the plantation, of poverty. And parents began to discourage their children from speaking French Creole because they thought that it would affect their acquisition of English. And they retained French Creole as a code language among adults when they wanted to speak what they referred to as bagay gourmoun, right? So adults topics. They would have used French Creole and spoke to the children in English in an attempt to stamp out French Creole or the use of it among the children. So by the turn of the 20th century, there was a decline in monolingual French Creole speakers. As education reached the far corners of Trinidad, English and English Creole quickly replaced French Creole as the most widely spoken languages, and the number of monolingual French Creole speakers began to decline. By the 1940s, French Creole became an endangered language in Trinidad because most of the speakers were elderly speakers, and it was kept among them as a code language to exclude children from adults' conversation. So it said anybody who was born after the 1940s in Trinidad most likely cannot speak French Creole fluently. Most of the speakers of French Creole in Trinidad are now between the ages of 60 and 80. So within the next 30 years, when most of them are dead, the language will most likely be dead as well. Despite the decline of French Creole, there are still areas in Trinidad where it's still spoken, and these areas are sort of remote rural areas. Some of them are Paramin, Blanchisses, Moruga, Kumaka, Cameron, San Rafael, Tabaquite, Arima, Pinal, Maraval, and Rancho Quemado. These areas are agricultural areas and fairly rural, so education didn't really make an impact in these areas until quite recently. So with all of this change in attitudes towards French Creole, the French Creole speakers began to feel ashamed of using it, and people would laugh at the accent or the use of the language when they came into the urban areas. So in the following video, there are some French Creole speakers discussing people's reactions to the use of French Creole and how it made them feel as French Creole speakers.
L'autre, il dit nous avons français, parti français, avec bagage qui croisé. Mais
Langage cochon.
Non, ouais,
Langage cochon. Mais en présent, regardez, vous savez quand vous pour langage cochon en présent?
Non, mais attends.
Mais pas qu'à parler d'argent.
Hey! Moi, je dis une question à présent. La matière jeune, garçon. Jeune. Personne ne partait ça sans moi. Parler par toi. Pas mettez qu'à.
C'est oui. C'est oui.
Non, mettez qu'à. Comment on dit? Non, pas capon. Caché. Non, caché. Comment on dit? Shame. Hein?
Oui.
Parce qu'on peut parler par toi, personne ne peut parler. Tout le monde peut parler anglais. Anglais plus belle passer cela. Vous sortez à country, vous connaissez.
Depuis vous commencez à parler par toi.
Oui. Vous country bouki.
Vous sortez à boire.
Vous sortez à boire.
Vous sortez à macaron comme ça.
Country.
Mais à présent.
À présent. À pile monde
ça c'est la vérité. Les deux vous sortez à boire, vous partez cette option.
Non,
c'est vrai. C'est à boire, vous sortez.
Oui, mais vous êtes qu'à country bouki.
Mais
comme ça,
où rentrez quoi? Quand vous faites?
Où rentrez quoi? Mais c'est pas quand vous faites, ou quand vous honte.
Vous êtes qu'à sortir honte.
Oui,
puis ça.
Mais c'est ça qui a fait honte. Oui. Vous ne pouvez pas parler aucun patois. Et puis attends ça, vous ne pouvez pas parler plus à pile au connaît. Parce que vous pour rester. Vous voulez comment?
Vous parlez belle diable?
Oui.
Il y a des gens qui t'ont dit, depuis moi temps nous qu'à parler, moi connaître c'est bois vous sortez à monde. Vous sortez pas amen.
Oui. Mettez qu'à honte pour 10 moun, mais qu'à rester pas amen. Parce que même bagarre yo ka yo contribue qui
Namni
non, attends ça. À pile de femmes, à pile de filles. Ou pas de personne qui yo contribue qui.
Okay, as I mentioned before, a lot of our music that was created in the 19th century was performed in French Creole. So we have ballet music as is found in the French Caribbean, as well as ballet dances. So in the next slide, we will listen and learn the words to a very popular Trinidad French Creole ballet song. So this song is called Vini Danser Ballet, which means in English, Come Dance the Ballet, written by Carlton Papa George Matthew. So on the left, we have the French Creole and your English on the right. Let's take a listen to it.
Vini danser belle, vini danser belle. Ay neneno, vini danser belle. Vini danser belle, vini danser belle. Ay neneno, vini danser belle. Vini danser belle. Ay neneno, vini danser belle. Ay neneno, vini danser belle. Mama mwen pe danse, oui neneno. Papa mwen pe danse, oui neneno. Sese mwen pe danse, oui neneno. Ay neneno, vini danse belle, vini danse belle, vini danse belle. Ay neneno, vini danse belle, vini danse belle, vini danse belle. Ay neneno, vini danse belle. Mwen pe danse ici, oui neneno. Mwen pe danse pa la, oui neneno. Mwen pe danse a ho. Vini danse belle,
Trinidad and Venezuela at the closest point are just 7 miles apart. So it's no surprise to find out that there has been much migration between the countries. So many Venezuelan Spanish speakers came and settled in Trinidad, and many Trinidad French Creole speakers went and settled in Venezuela. The eastern coast of Venezuela, as well as such areas as El Callao, have had a very strong French Creole presence. At one time in areas like Guerrero, French Creole was more widely used than Spanish, since there was more interaction with Trinidad than other parts of Venezuela. For example, Guerrero is closer to Trinidad than other parts of Venezuela. So there was a lot of commerce and exchanges done with Trinidad up to the 1960s. French Creole is carried to Venezuela by immigrants from the French islands, as well as, and I would say mainly by French Creole speaking Trinidadians and Grenadians. So as a result, their French Creole is very similar to Trinidadian and Grenadian French Creole. There are very few French Creole speakers left in Venezuela, and at one time the Chavez government had been making great efforts to preserve and promote it. They had several conferences on French Creole in Venezuela, starting in 2005 and as recently as 2011, where they were trying to have it preserved, even have it being taught in schools. In the following slide, we'll see a video of a Patois speaker, a French Creole speaker from Venezuela, speaking about her experience as a child speaking French Creole in Guerrero, at a time when there were very few children speaking it. Kote wale l'école?
Moi, à l'école, ils n'ont pas de place.
Ok. Et à l'école là, vous te parlez espagnol?
À l'école là, côté moi, tu n'as pas de tini moun qui parle pas toi.
Pièce moun?
Non.
C'est à la caille où tu parlé?
Oui. Moi, tu parle pas toi et puis comme maman.
Ok.
À l'autre place, côté moi, tu n'as pas de parler pas. Le matin, ici, tu as oui. Et tu as moun comme ça qui parle pas toi, mais moi, pas de parler. Mais tu as moun qui parle pas toi. Et puis moi, c'est un petit maman. Et puis moi, tu as crié moi pour moi parler pas toi.
Ok.
Oui. Parce que pas te connaître petit maman qui parle pas toi. Et les gens qui te parlent pas toi à la rue par là, yo te connaît mais te crier moi pour moi parler pas toi pas te petit maman qui parle pas toi.
Et à présent, vous connaissez le monde qui parle pas toi ici en ville?
Oui, mais pas en pile non. Mais longtemps tenir en pile monde, mais pas à présent. C'est là c'était vieux monde déjà c'est mon ça.
So next, I'll speak a bit about my preservation efforts at saving our dying Trinidad French Creole language. I wrote a songbook and published it in 2009 entitled Vini Chante en Patois, which has about 30 or so Trinidad French Creole songs, a mixture of genres from ballet music to folk songs to game songs to stick fighting songs. I've also audiovisually documented French Creole speakers from Trinidad, Grenada, and Venezuela, starting in 2001 or so. I have 2 YouTube channels where I have some of these videos posted. One, Cat Vixen Chick and Namdi Hodge are my 2 YouTube channels. You will see some of my videos of Venezuelan, Grenadian, and Trinidad Patois speakers posted with subtitles. Some of them are subtitled. I also have a Facebook page called Trinidad Patois Speakers. Now we use the word Patois because in Trinidad, French Creole refers to an ethnic group. So we use the word Patois to avoid being too ambiguous to Trinidadians. So we use the word Patois to the layman, but we use the word French Creole in more academic settings and circles. I also have been giving classes since 1999 with emphasis on the Trinidad variety of French Creole. And now my classes are being, well, thanks to the coronavirus and the restrictions, I have started to offer French Creole classes online starting in about March or so. I've had 2 levels being offered online. If you're interested, you can contact me afterwards to be part of a Trinidad French Creole class. Okay, so merci en pile et puis ayo tout moun. Thank you very much and goodbye everybody.
Just
Wow.
excellent. Excellent.
Thank you, Namdi. So we have time. I mean, the questions are at the end, but really I'd like to just take a minute now. And if anyone has a question for Namdi about Trinidad Creole, now's the time to ask. But you'll also have another opportunity at the end.
Yeah, if I may, just a quick question on the hope your microphone is on mute,
Yes,
Nandi?
it's,
Ah,
yes,
yeah,
it's
okay.
unmuted, yes.
Just a quick question. I noticed in French Creole in Trinidad, like in St. Lucia, you use the W in front of the vowel.
Like yes,
The
yes, yes,
W.
oh, yes, yes.
Yeah.
We have some folks, like we have some words where we have to. Sometimes we say, for example, la reine or la reine. So we have some words where you have a R variant or W variant.
Tell me, is it because of the influence of the English?
Yes, it is very much so.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay,
the English
that's what I
has
thought.
made us use the R or the W. Yes.
Right, because in Haiti, the R exists in the alphabet, but we do not use it the way you do.
Yes, so we use either an English R or a W.
Okay. All right. So,
merci en pile, professeur Hodge. Nous vraiment édifiés, nous contents.
Okay, merci,
we are very pleased. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Et nous saluons tout le monde qui suit nous là, tout internet, tout le monde content nous là.
Oui, nous avons un monde, nous avons Darius Dean, qui est de Guyana, sorti, un monde très connu dans la communauté antillaise là. Dans la télévision, radio, journaliste, etc. Donc, Darius, bienvenue. France Buteau, qui est sœur Dr. Racine, nous saluons le tout.
Nous saluons Maître Fritz Fouji, qui suit nous là, de même que Dr. Ghislaine Fouji, qui suit. Et un peu d'autres monde qui réunit, on croit que à souhait un peu le monde et tout le monde qui l'a joint un peu belle provision sur créole noir. Et puis n'importe genre, même si il y a une petite variation de différence légère, nous avons unité,
c'est ça. Nous saluons Guylaine André, si c'est lui-même, moi pense lié, moi c'est New York lié. Nous saluons le tout. Bon, on a passé dans le prochain.
Oui, on a passé par là-bas, professeur Muret.
So our last presentation is going to be on French Creole in Cuba. So I'm going to turn it over to Serge, who will introduce this Hilario Batista, who will be talking about Creole in Cuba.
Thanks, James. For those, a lot of people who are listening probably know about it, but there are many people who do not realize how important the Creole language, the Haitian Creole to be specific, is in Cuba. In fact, it's the second spoken language in Cuba. And there are more than 500,000 Cuban of Haitian descent living in Cuba. And Hilario Batista is one of the catalysts of the Creole movement in Cuba. More than 10 years ago, he created this group called Banzil Creole. And every 2 years, he has a big conference that he organizes, and you have Haitians coming from Provincia de Oriente, from Guantanamo, from Cienfuegos, from a variety of areas, and this takes place in Havana. And I've had the privilege to go 3 times already, assisting that. This year I couldn't because of the COVID, which messed up everybody's schedule. So we probably might get some questions later. I won't say too long for the introduction because he said so. One caveat though, et m'a annoncé audience là, vidéo li pas aussi clair que l'état doué, donc n'a pas excusé nous à l'avance. Et dans commencement et pendant peut-être à peine une minute, il a la parlé, il présenté tête li en pagnol. Et puis après ça, il passé à créole là. Donc, nous devons avertir nous pour ne pas penser que toute intervention, c'est en pagnol que lié. So the intervention of Ilario will be at the beginning with just 1 minute in Spanish, where he introduces himself. And then he goes on into Haitian Creole. And I believe that we have the translation, but I will provide the translation into English if necessary. Okay, let's go.
Mi nombre es Hilario Batista Félix, soy descendiente de haitiano. Mi papá vino de Caballón y mi abuelo materno de Tobeca. El creol llega a Cuba a partir de la Revolución Haitiana, es decir, a partir de 1791, cuando muchos colonos franceses emigran hacia acá con sus esclavos, fundamentalmente en la parte oriental de Cuba. A partir de ahí, luego aumenta con la llegada de braceros a Cuba, por lo que el creol forma parte de lo que nosotros decimos de la identidad lingüística y cultural de Cuba, fundamentalmente en las provincias orientales, decimos desde Camagüey, Guantánamo, es decir, desde Guantánamo hasta Ciego de Ávila o hasta Santo Espíritu, tenemos una gran presencia de la cultura creol. Hoy en Cuba calculamos más de 400.000 cubanos que conservan la cultura creol, pero no solamente en el lenguaje, sino tenemos la música, en la danza, en el teatro, en el arte culinario, es decir, en todo. La presencia haitiana es muy fuerte en Cuba y es por eso que el creol lo tenemos como segunda lengua. Hay muchos de los descendientes haitianos, por ejemplo, que empezaron a hablar el español cuando fueron a la escuela, porque la primera lengua que nosotros aprendimos en casa fue el creol. Non c'est Hilario Batista Félix, c'est président du Banzil Créole, journaliste, c'est petit haïtien, papa m'a sorti Cavaillon, maman m'a sorti famille, maman m'a papa m'a sorti Tobec. Créole là, c'est une réalité nakiba et nakaraïba. Pour Nakakiba, dans l'arrivée de Nakiba, à partir de 1791, la révolution haïtienne a commencé le bois, les fusiliers français, ça veut dire colons français qui viennent avec esclaves, principalement dans la zone orient pays. C'est pour raison ça, dès là que l'on a commencé d'aller dans toute zone de bois. Créole là, c'est une réalité nakiba. Nakiba nous calcule plus de 400 000 personnes qui conservaient petit créole là. Ça veut dire dans langage, musique, théâtre, danse, religion et la prière. Tout partout, on voit Nakiba qui a comme parler créole. Si pas qu'on parle, mais ils comprennent ou ils conservent une richesse qui est haïtienne, qui est créole là. C'est pour raison ça que Nakiba, nous créons en 1797 Bandit Créole. Bandit Créole, c'est un projet culturel qui travaille pour conserver qui créole là, quand nous faisons des activités. Toujours fêter Journée internationale créole là, nous faisons une créole. Nous avons une classe créole, pour tout le monde apprendre à lire et écrire créole. À part ça, nous avons Radio La Vantiva, qui a plus de 60 années, côté la transmettre. Ça veut dire que là, fait partie de l'identité. Puis, ça, c'est une raison, Bandila à travailler. Pour nous, car bien clair, que créole là, c'est l'identité. Les pays qui parlent créole, si nous parlons maintenant qui va, nous commettons l'injustice. Parce que créole là formait partie de l'identité Kiba. Kiba, c'est un pays qui le forme. Dans le cas Kiba, il y a plusieurs festivals tout. il fait dans plusieurs provinces. Parce que créole là, plus important, dans le cas de nous, créole là, il y a plus base. Depuis Guantanamo jusqu'à la province de Santo Espíritu. Parce que ça veut dire si vous regardez la Camagüey, Guantanamo, Holguín, Las Tunas, Santiago, tout ça, il y a plein de descendants haïtiens, plein de créolophones, descendants qui parlent créole. C'est parce que ce n'est pas seulement haïtien, mais qui parlent en pile tout, ça veut dire que c'est Martinique, Guadeloupe, la Dominique, Sainte-Lucie, bah, il y a un pile qui est venu tout, qui te parlait créole. Il y a un pile côté, c'était en pile antilles, ça veut dire même que des langues anglaises, mais ils ont vécu dans baracon, dans bataille avec haïtiens, donc regardez tout te vient apprendre à parler créole tout. Ça veut dire que créole là, toute deuxième langue nous ici, c'est pas depuis qu'on c'est depuis longtemps. Pour force et dinanana, c'est pour mon niveau ici là. Et c'est une raison pour qui ça n'a travail pour nous conserver qui dit créole là. Nous avons plus que 60 groupes entre groupes musiciens, nous avons dit, groupe danse, théâtre, qui a conservé culture créole. Il y a plusieurs festivals qui font chaque année ou chaque 2 ans, c'est selon la province là, côté il y a conservé culture créole dans Kiba. Exemple, nous avons Eva Gaspar qui fait dans la province de Rovira, nous avons la zone Camagüey tout, nous avons la zone Holguín, côté le San Germán, Cueto, côté il y a toujours à fêter ce festival, nous avons Barranca dans la province de Santiago de Cuba, nous avons Guantanamo qui fait activité tout, et nous-mêmes dans la Havana, nous avons chaque 2 ans, bandit créole organisé festival Cuba créole. Pour qui ça, pour nous kembe comme partie qui dit noir et nous pouvons oublier. Parce que si nous oublions créole là, nous oublions propre racine, nous oublions propre ancêtres, ils ne savent pas qu'à faire. C'est ça, nous avons toujours dit nous comme ça que fêter journée internationale créole là pour nous, c'est un devoir. Il y a un petit travail qu'a fait. Exemple, nous avons ici premier livre qui est écrit en créole. Nous avons une poésie, premier livre poésie qui est écrit en créole depuis Cuba. C'est ça. C'est ça. Nous avons dit nostalgie sans point ni virgule. Mais pour tout haïtien, pour tout le monde qui quitte le pays pour une raison ou l'autre, mais c'est l'histoire ça. L'histoire ça paraît dans nostalgie sans point ni virgule. Que première édition qui est sortie au Canada, par quelqu'un, grâce à quelqu'un qui te fait sortir première édition livre ça. N'a profité, ça lié à toute créolophonie, n'importe côté, à l'occasion de journée internationale créole. Il faut mettre partie identité. Et créole là, c'est une langue dans les Caraïbes liée. Créole là, il y a une force dans les Caraïbes là, c'est pour nous qu'embellir. C'est pour nous pousser devant, parce que c'est identité, nous ne pouvons pas quitter derrière.
Oui, voilà.
Okay.
Go ahead, James.
So we now have a few minutes for questions. My students, if you have to go, I understand that. Thank you so much for staying really 2 hours beyond the end of your class time. I appreciate that. So if you have to leave now for my class, I understand. But for the rest of us, perhaps if we could take just 10 minutes, and we may go over by 10 minutes. If you have to leave, you're welcome to. But but for the last 10 minutes, we'd like to open it up to our panelists for questions.
Mm-hmm.
And
do we have? Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 But if one thing I could add also is that, and it happens in Creole, it happens in Spanish also. Sometimes those people speak, and what I call sometimes mental laziness, they don't bother to use the language, the word in their own language, and they just use the English word without bothering to know what that means. There is a word, for example, that comes to my mind. It's not a legal word. The word groceries. There are some Spanish stores. They put on the on the window. They put groceria, right? From groceries, and groceria means something rude. But because there's a grocery, they will put groceria. Just they don't bother to look for the right word. So I suppose in the legal system, it's even easier for them to take the easy route and then just use the legal word. Period.
And there is another question. It's from Yannick. Yannick asks, how is St. Lucian Creole compared to, she said Creole, I guess she wanted to say Haitian
Right.
Creole.
Right. I would say like a Creole in St. Lucia, and to a certain extent, I suppose Mandy and Professor Hodge can say about Trinidad Creole, but the Creole in St. Lucia is very much influenced by Creole in Martinique, Guadeloupe. There are a lot of structures, words, etc. Because from St. Lucia you can take the boat, and be in Martinique. So there are a lot of exchanges, and like. I would say that the words and some of the rules that you'll find in Guadeloupean, Martinique, and Creole are the same as in St. Lucia, and this is normal, I would say.
Okay.
Trinidad as well. In Trinidad as well. It's the same as yes. Ours is very much like the Martinican variety. So
yeah,
same in Trinidad. Yeah.
But
when we listen to Professor Regis Onfray at the beginning when he was speaking Creole, it was clear that the Creole was very close to the Haitian Creole, except that he used words like timamay, même des petits, il a dit timamay. Mais toute construction phrase là, toute bagaille, c'était très proche de Creole haïtien, close to it. Yeah.
Okay, gentlemen, if I may, there is an issue. Someone is saying they cannot hear the interpreting, so everybody was listening, and they want it back.
Really? They want the translation from
the interpreter was interpreting the entire night.
From you mean?
Yes. Well, as you know, we refer to ourselves in the third person of habit.
Wow.
So I don't know.
Some of those texts are typed, so maybe if they send an email, we could send them the written translation at this stage. Oh well, actually, no, I guess I don't know. I guess that would be the simplest thing to do, to send them the written translation.
Okay, there is another question, Academician Bellegarde. What are the similarities, if any, between Haitian or Caribbean Creole and Creole used in African countries, and maybe some of the English Caribbean countries. This is from Deris Dean.
Ah, okay.
And there are many other questions after
Well,
that.
I would say that, you know, the French-based Creole that we speak in the Caribbean has kept the African structure. In Creole, we would say charpente African, but it is dominated, of course, by French. And that's why they say, you know, the lexicon is in French, but a lot of those words originate in terms of sound structure from Togo, where they speak their language, the Fongbe in Benin, and Yoruba, and probably part of Senegal too, because you find a lot of those words. So I would say this is the African input into the Creole, the French-based Creole. I don't know if Professor Hodge wants to add something, but basically, if you were to make some research, you'd be surprised to see how many words as far as the sound. Oh, by the way, a small anecdote. When in this past January, before COVID, I was in Benin.
Oh, yes.
And I went to a restaurant. We were in a restaurant with my wife, and I said, you know what, I'm going to experiment something. So I went to the restaurant, and of course the waiter met us at the door. And I spoke to him in Haitian Creole. I told him, "Oh, comment are you?" And he answered normally, without any problem. I don't know if it was because of the sound or what, but and I think I told him another sentence. I don't remember which, but we answered without any problem. So that gives you an idea of how close in terms
Est-ce que dans le créole, il répond nous tout bon?
Non, il répond dans la langue parlée. Non. Il répond dans la langue, pour vrai. Donc, intéressant, mais oui, apparemment, le comprendre.
I do have a question for Professor Hodge. So what has been the reception to your efforts to revive Creole in Trinidad?
We are getting a good reception from everybody except the government. Because our government is seeing Spanish as more important than French Creole because we are close to Venezuela. So they say there's no money to be made from Creole, so why bother? But everybody else except the government is supporting us.
Okay, thank you.
You see, this is, of course, we don't have time for a long discussion about that, but people think that the issue of Creole is just a matter of speaking only.
It's the culture.
No, there is much more. There is the culture, and there is the social progress. There is the economic aspect of it. Because do you think that, for example, that the Francophonie is just a matter of speaking French? No. You have a lot of developmental issues involved, economic assistance, all kind of cooperation issues involved in creating this how would I say, association, you could say, because you have the Commonwealth. It's not a matter of speaking English only. Francophonie is not a matter of speaking French only. There are a whole lot of other aspects involved in that. But it takes a political will and a certain, and no crisis of identity, right? So
someone's also asking, I don't know if we have that slide, but for resources, a list of resources for learning Haitian Creole. And I see, so Lori put in the chat the link to the Academy, the Haitian Creole Academy, also asking for resources for learning Haitian Creole. I put one link to the University of Kansas. The University of Kansas has a series of open source, Creative Commons copyrighted material that you can use. It's quite extensive, actually, for introductory Haitian Creole. And it's also accompanied by CDs, sound recordings that you can download to accompany the textbook as well.
Is it a question? Somebody speaking, I don't hear.
No, I think Regine is interpreting.
Okay.
Okay. So, Professor Murray, time to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Before we go, I will thank you very much, Professor Mire, and for guiding us tonight, for being the moderator. And I thank all the guests, all the people that were with us tonight also, and Professor Hodge and all the other people that presented the conference tonight. And
Il faut que nous présenter des excuses tout pour question interprétation, parce qu'on n'a pas comprendre que tu as un problème ça yo. Donc pour interprétation. Donc monde qui t'a mais pas contre si c'est interprétation en anglais ou bien en créole mais il y a 2-3 textes et traduction yo qui tapé. Donc monde qui t'a intéressé capable envoyer email yo et puis n'envoyer le barreau donc quand ça y a une petite lecture pour faire.
Déjà. Donc, n'importe commentaire, vous pouvez envoyer sur le site noir, Réservoir Outils Créole, Réservoir Outils Créole, envoyez commentaire, si vous avez l'autre question tout. Et puis rapidement, before I give the mic to Professor Murray, une grosse activité, une organisation Borimix Haïti, son grande activité culturelle qui a bien tout le mois de novembre dans Porto Rico. Et puis c'est Haïti qui a donc à suivre, chercher un petit détail sur Borimix Haïti. Donc c'est ça. Professor Murray, please, Professor Murray now.
Sure. I'd like to thank the presenters.
We go to Professor Murray.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
No.
I'd like to thank the presenters again, Dr. Williams and Mr. Bellegarde. This is the 4th time they have presented for Montgomery College, and they're here locally. But I'd like to give a special thank you to all the way to Namdi Hodge, who's here all the way from Trinidad. And this week has been simply hectic for him. He's been presenting on television programs. He's been teaching his own courses in high school, and he's been teaching us every Monday night in Trinidad Patois. So, I mean, I felt so bad asking him to come and present here. And he's presenting again. He's presenting again at Montgomery College tomorrow, along with some other class members on Grenada Creole as well. So thank you very much. And for any attendee, yes.
Professor Hodge, I'm looking forward to coming to visit you in Trinidad because I love Trinidad. So we'll be in touch too, James.
Yes, we will. Yes.
So I'd just like to close by inviting you to the final 3 events of Creole Week. And the links to these events are in the chat. If you go all the way to the beginning, it's the very first link I sent you. But tomorrow from 2 to 3:15, there's a presentation on French Creole in Grenada. Professor Hodge is going to be returning to talk about Creole in Trinidad. And also there's going to be a presentation on the Venezuelan immigrant culture in Trinidad, the Coco Pañols. On Wednesday also at 6:30, there's going to be the entertainment portion of the Jounen International Langue Creole, the presentation put on by Kamalak. Please don't miss that. That's from 6:30 to 9 tomorrow. And I've also sent you a link. And on Friday at 7 o'clock, and I've sent you the link to register, Dr. Namada Blyden from George Washington University is going to be presenting on Sierra Leone Creole. And that's going to be fascinating. You won't want to miss that as well. So thank you all very much for attending and have a great night.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bonne nuit. Merci. Au revoir. Bonne soirée. Et nous café rendez-vous pour demain soir, 6h.
6h. Non, 6h30.
6h30. 6h30. 6h30. précision. And again, Professor Hodge, thank you from Trinidad to be with us tonight. We appreciate that.
Manifeste problème.
Bye, Namdi. I'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah.
Merci en pile. Merci pour tous. Merci tout le monde.
Bye, guys.
Good night.
Fête là, you bel petit pays qui baigne dans mer des Antilles. Pays m'si là, oui me révèle, il est tellement douce, tellement tranquille. Haïti, c'est qu'on ça le relais, il est très joli, il est très charmant. Yo met bon l'or, met bon diamant, moins pas besoin quitter. Haïti, Haïti, moi j'aime pour toute la vie. Haïti, maman chérie, c'est l'endroit pour moi mourir. Haïti, Haïti, moi j'aime pour toute la vie. Haïti, maman chérie, c'est l'endroit pour mourir. C'est la tout douce, les douces passées you can créole. Les titres pas comprendre valeur, parce que yo pas gagné bon Dieu. Mais étranger qu'on apprécie, dès que nos pays là vini, yo pas monté pièce pour le quitter. Quand il y aurait mes lits.